right.
Well, see, and this is another reason that I like having the information for the seller up front, because sometimes there may be a prior loan that your seller had that maybe a release of lien was never recorded. And if we know that we're only paying off one and we see two, we know that we need to go in and do a little bit of research and find that missing release of lien and get it recorded.
Is that the issues that you come up with the most?
Missing releases, yes.
So how does it not get recorded? Whose responsibility is to record, or how does that get missed?
Each lender has their own process when you pay it off. Some will send it back to the borrower, some will send it to the county, some will send it to the wrong county, so it may be recorded in Harris County if the property's in Montgomery County. Some send it back to the title company, just depending on their process. Some we provide, we pay, collect from your client for a release of lien that we send with a letter when we send our closing funds. Some lenders use their own. They don't even use the document that we prepare. So, whose responsibility, it's not set in stone. Like, you need to, it's always good to tell your seller afterwards, maybe to check about 2 months after closing and just make sure that was taken care of. Or else they may be contacted in the future. I've had to go back a couple owners before and hunt them down to get them to sign off necessary paperwork. So it's the fun part of the job.
We're really happy when we're working with a seller and there's a missing release and they have really good files and it's in their file. They just didn't record it.
Yeah.
So that's like easy because they've got the document and we can get it from them and we can record it.
Yeah.
If we have to go back to a mortgage company, we've got a couple of people in our office that know how to do that very well.
Yes.
So have the patience to deal with being on hold for 45 minutes to get to the right place. So, but that is a big reason why it's good to tell us up front, hey, they've got one payoff. When we get the title commitment in and there's more than one, then we know, oh, there's something we need to work on here. So something else. Like I said, when we send this to you, if there's something unusual other than just a mortgage, which is what this one is on number 5, which typically that's on our title commitments where the mortgage loan will show up, is Schedule C number 5. But if there's something not typical, like lately I've had several with IRS liens on them, we won't just send this to you for you to have a heart attack when you open it. We will tell you it's there. We know it's there. We're gonna need to talk to the seller and figure out what's going on.
Okay, so does the title commitment typically get sent to the realtor, or to the seller, or to who gets it?
We like to send it to everybody.
Okay.
Make sure that everybody's in the
Seller and buyer.
and agent. So what our practice is if we have the contact information for the seller, we'll send it to the seller, but the agent, their listing agent, is always CC'd. Same thing for the buyer.
Great.
So we make sure that you guys are in the loop. You are fully aware of what's going on. If there's ever any issues, I like to call in advance and say, just wanted to give you a heads up. My assistant's going to be sending out the title commitment on this. This is what popped up, and this is what we're already doing to get it cleared, or this is what we need to do to get it cleared.
And really, I believe the contract says that we're supposed to send it to the buyer and the seller. If we don't have their contact information, we can't do that, but we'll always send it to you. So whoever's contact information we have, but if we only have the agent's information, then that's all we can do, and then you'll need to forward it to your client. So
I know on a contract, a lot of times, I guess agents don't want the other agent to know the other person's information for whatever reason, so I guess sometimes you probably don't get that information.
right.
I haven't done it enough to know the pros or cons of that, so.
So if a problem comes up, do you contact the person who has the lien, the seller, and tell
Right.
them? Or
Yes.
So you don't tell the agent? Okay.
Well, we will, both.
The agent will be our first phone call.
Oh,
Because
okay.
what we don't want to happen is we don't want to go to your seller first and then they beat us to you and say, the title company just called me and told me this and this and this and
Okay.
this, and
you
we
have
would,
no clue.
and you're like, what? So we like to keep you looped in.
Okay.
And you're the first to know. So.
unless they happen to call us before we get to
Yeah.
call you.
Yeah.
But yes, we want to make sure that you know first before we talk to your client. And like Tiffany said, in our office, it's really important that we don't want you to be caught looking like you don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that anytime we have any communication with your client, you're informed about it. If they call us, we'll either call you or send you a quick email and say, hey, you know, Mr. Smith just called, here was how our conversation went, just so you know.
Okay.
Well, and then the second, I think, most common issue that pulls up on Schedule C is people with common names. When we run names, like your buyer or your seller, and their last name is, let's say their name is John Smith or Robert Clark, or they've got a common name, not common, popular. I like to say popular, not common. There's gonna be an item on here that says several liens and judgments have pulled up on title against someone with the same name or similar name as Robert Clark. So what we do, it doesn't necessarily mean it's your person. We just have to make sure, get socials, driver's license, date of births, and submit that, and we're able to clear the items from title based off of those 99% of the time. Sometimes when a lien or judgment's filed, whoever files it doesn't include any identifying factors. So what we do in that case is they sign a not the same person affidavit at closing. So if you have a contract where you're representing the buyer and you see title where there's issues against someone with the same name as the seller, it's not necessarily the same person. And again, when that pulls up, I call both agents whenever there's an issue, and I'm like, we've already worked, the seller is working on getting us this information to clear it. So that's.
Don't worry.
Yeah, don't worry.
We'll tell you when you need to
Yeah.
worry.
That's good.
So, what else? We've had, like I said, we've had several with IRS tax liens. I mean, it's always a happy day when we figure out, oh, it's not our person, different social, get it off of there.
Yeah.
But occasionally it is, and most of the time, if a seller has an IRS tax lien, they know it very well.
Mhm.
They may not have told you.
Yeah.
So then it pulls up on the title work, and it's like everybody knows. So we just have to work with IRS to get a payoff and pay it off through closing. Or occasionally, IRS will issue a release just as to the property if it's their homestead. So we'll ask for the seller, hey, who is your contact person then? What's their phone number? Do you have a file number with them? And there's a document the seller can sign that allows us to talk directly with IRS.
I bet that's fun.
Yes, it's very fun. So I guess we kind of did Schedule C.
And then Schedule D, you'll see here our officers, directors for Chicago Title. And then down at the bottom, you'll see here owner's policy, loan policy, and endorsement charges. And this will tell you what the breakdown, the expected charges for the owner's policy will be, what a breakdown for your loan, and then what the endorsements will cost.
And the endorsements go with the loan policy. So the loan policy is what they are doing what they call simultaneous issue, which means we're issuing two policies at the same time. So the owner's policy is the more expensive because it's based on the sales price, but because we're issuing that mortgage policy at the same time, there's a discount. And it's $100, but rarely is it only $100 because most lenders want endorsements added. And so it's really the two, the endorsements and the loan policy added together.
What are the endorsements?
They want the survey coverage, they want coverage that all the taxes are paid current.
So endorsement just means some add-on coverage?
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
So, and then that's pretty much it. When the final title insurance policy comes out to the buyer and to the lender, it will only have a Schedule A and B. There will be no more Schedule C and D because Schedule C is requirements before we issue. So that's gone, so we would have already taken care of that.
All right, I know we talked a lot about surveys before, but there's a packet in here, and it's surveys, title company overview, and what it states, you know, it has the general information, why and when it's needed, what we do for our review and approval process, things to watch for on the survey, talks a little bit more about the survey deletion and the T-47 affidavit too.
And in here, we gave you some examples of surveys. That first one is done by Precision Surveyors, which at the title company, we end up ordering a lot of surveys, but we always work with the mortgage company because some mortgage companies want to order the survey themselves. If they ask us to order it, we typically have been ordering from Precision for several years now because we feel like they have a really good product and they do a good job and they're responsive and quick. So, but a buyer always has a choice. So if they know a surveyor, they can always choose what company they want it ordered from.
Well, are there typical survey issues that you see? Like a pool encroachment, for example, or a fence? I mean, what are the most common things that we need to kind of be aware of?
The ones that I see most are fence.
Okay.
Fence is not following the boundary lines.
And is that because probably the homeowner themselves installed the fence, or?
It could be a possibility, or whatever fence I mean, the prior owner it may not have been caught on the other survey.
Okay.
Whenever they purchased the house.
Okay.
I mean, there are several.
On this one, the very first one here,
Mhm.
Precision Surveyors does a good job of pointing things out. So they'll have a little box
Yes, right.
out here to the side. And the one they've got on this one says residence does not affect the aerial easement. So you see the little broken lines that are
Mhm.
printed, those are showing easements.
Mhm.
The ground easement is from the property line, which is the dark line, to the first broken line, and it says that it's 16 feet. So the utility lines run underground there.
Yes.
Adjacent to that is another easement that says that it's another 5.6 feet from the utility easement, but it calls it an aerial easement, which means that it gives rights for something in the air that's higher than 16 feet. So the notation that they made is, yes, the residence is in that easement, but it's not higher than 16 feet in that place, so it's not a problem.
Okay.
Okay, so it's not affecting that. It also shows that the concrete deck is into the utility easement for the pool, a little bit lower. There's a little box for that. That's usually not a problem. That's something that we'll insure. So,
As long as the easement is not
totally covered.
totally covered.
This is just a small.
So you don't make them jack in.
Yeah.
No.
Good.
No, but I did have one a few years ago where the pool itself, actually, the next survey.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know if that one was the one I closed, but,
I think this was 20 years.
the pool is in the easement there. And that was a problem. And they ended up having to go back to the pool company. And they couldn't move the pool. But they had to go to all of the different utility companies that have rights to use that easement and get waivers and authorization for the pool to be there, and all of those had to be recorded with the county. And it costs money and it costs time to do that. And that pool company, thank goodness they were still around, and it ended up costing them money to get it corrected. Because they had it was in the Woodlands, and they had all the proper authorization to build the pool, but they did it in the wrong place. So, that was a time when it cost them money for not getting it right. Yeah. And then the reason we have the big circle there around the certification is just showing what an acceptable certification will look like. It's a surveyor who's been to school and taken the test and become certified.
And then the next sample survey that we have, Debbie briefly touched on earlier about the field notes and meets and bounds. So this is what your survey may look like for acreage.
So if you have a seller that has something like this, it's incomplete without that next page.
Well,
that
is
shows-
there a threshold where the field notes would be required? Half acre, 2 acres?
It depends on what the surveyor did, so,
Okay.
Somewhere on here, it may give a brief legal description,
Yes.
Right up the
which I
top.
think we kind of whited out some of that for privacy reasons.
Okay.
Well, if you look in the middle, it says the 2.504 acres being called as the northwest half of lot 94, section 7. And then if
Yes.
you keep reading, the very last see attached meets and bounds.
Gotcha.
Or see attached field notes is what you'll see.
Okay.
And that's how you'll know that you'll need field notes or.
Okay. Gotcha.
And the legal description I've had before where they couldn't find their field notes, so what they did is they just took what was attached to the recorded warranty deed. That does not work. We actually have to have a seal on your field notes too, and signature from the surveyor.
Okay.
And just something else that kind of ran through my mind to tell you is that when you're estimating the cost of a survey, on a lot and block, you can estimate $450 and you'll probably be estimating a little high because they don't quite charge that. But when you're getting into any kind of acreage, if you're needing to give an estimate to somebody, feel free to call us and we can get an estimate for you. We can always call Precision and they'll get an estimate back to us. So, we kind of already went through the Schedule B, what that survey coverage does for you. It amends that exception on number 2. Oh, I think that last one, where we circled up there at the top, we were talking about, a property has to have access. I believe that's what it's been a while since we did this one.
Yes, it does have access.
Reference on landscape. Oh, no, I think what it was talking about is where it says iron rod set. Generally, the surveyor will find at least one of the iron rods that are in the ground, and then they may have to calculate and set if they can't find them. So in this particular property, they had to set one here, which means they didn't find it. They actually calculated where it should be, and they put the rod in.
How big are those iron rods? I don't know if I've ever seen one.
I've never seen one.
Oh, you haven't either?
No, I haven't actually gone out and looked. I should maybe do that at my house.
Well, they're below ground, aren't they?
Right, most of the time they are.
Do you know how deep they sink them in?
I don't. The surveyors are good at it. I think they have their little metal detector thing
I was
out
gonna
there
say, I
looking
bet
for
they
them.
do.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't need
So,
to, that's news to me, I didn't know how they did any of
I
that
didn't
stuff,
either.
so I was like,
Yeah.
going, oh, okay, well, that's kind of cool.
somewhere out there, there should be at least one. And in a newer neighborhood, a lot of times they find all of them. So the more of them they can find, the better.
Yes.
Is that what they flag when they're like doing the little flags?
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, they're flagging. At least that, and then sometimes if it's long, they'll do some in between, right along the property line. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
Next, we have the copy of the T-47 affidavit. So this is what your T-47 affidavit will look like. And we also do have them sign another one at closing as well. So they'll sign one at the beginning of the transaction with you guys, and then the last one they'll sign as part of their closing documents as well. Just to confirm no changes have been made.
Okay, and then the last page, the contract has actually changed since we put this together. But it still pretty much says the same thing, where we were talking earlier where it says the seller would provide the survey within, and in this case, they wrote in 5 days. I've seen them where it says 2 days. If you don't have it in your possession, I wouldn't accept a contract that says 2 days. If the buyer submits that, or cross it out and give yourself a little more time. But then the wording there is still the same, so if they don't provide it, well, if they did provide it, it says in this case that the buyer would pay for the survey. That box is marked. But then it goes on and says, if seller fails to furnish the existing survey or the affidavit within the time prescribed, the buyer shall obtain a new survey at seller's expense. So that's where the seller has to pay for it if they don't do what they promised they would. So that's come up a lot. So it's something that we really stress. It's not fun.
Go over some of the items that pull up on Schedule C. Divorce issues.
So we're on title talk.
Title
yes.
top, the Chicago title.
Yeah,
Thank you.
these are issues.
Well, the first question that we'll ask if there's a divorce that is in the process at closing is we'll ask you whether it will be prior to the close of the transaction. If the answer is no, then all sellers will be required to sign at closing, and proceeds will either be paid directly to both of them in one check or wire, or we can split the proceeds 50-50 and issue 2 checks or wires. Other cases that I've seen is sometimes an attorney, they'll have an agreement where we can pay the attorney, and the attorney holds the funds and escrows, if it's a bad divorce. Yeah. And then if the question is yes, we'll need a certified copy of the complete signed and court stamped divorce decree to review. And then typically our instruction on how to disperse is in that document.
Right. If that divorce is final, that decree rules what we have to do, because it will be handled in the decree stating how the proceeds are to be dispersed. So, if you know it's a divorce situation on your listing, that's one of those times when it'd be a good idea to open title before you have a contract, so that we can go ahead and see what's on title ahead of time.
That's my listing right now then, so that's good.
Yeah, so, you know, if they're getting along and everything seems to be going as it should, and they're talking, you know, but it can get touchy, you know, like even our end of things, to always make sure you as an agent may have more contact with one party than the other, and we don't ever want it to look like to that other person that we're working only for one side. That can make a touchy situation worse. So we always want to present it as we're there for both of them. Everybody has the same information. So, yeah, and then we often get asked to do separate closings, which can be accommodated. So, you know, it just gets uncomfortable. A lot of this in residential, you're dealing with families, sometimes it gets touchy.
Do you ever have an armed guard at these situations?
Not
We
yet.
haven't needed them yet.
Okay, good to know.
We do have building security though, if we need to let anyone, just come hang out in the lobby.
Yes.
So items that might be pulled up on the divorce decree is sometimes the divorce decree, once it's final, will again require closings and split proceeds to be 50-50. Sometimes one of your sellers is awarded the property and the other one's no longer involved. And in that case, what we do is we either record the certified copy of the divorce decree with the real property records, or we have the spouse or the ex that is no longer involved in the transaction sign a warranty deed, which gives all of the title to the person that was awarded the property.
Yeah, if the attorney who handled it put the correct language in that divorce decree where it says the spouse who's not getting the property is divested of all rights, title, and claims, then we don't have to go track them down and get them to sign a deed. We can just record that divorce decree in the real property records, and that will show that chain of title and why the spouse is not signing to sell.
So the divorce decree itself can remove ownership rights on property?
If the right language is in there.
Oh,
Yes.
wow, okay.
Mhm. Yes. So, most attorneys will get them to sign that deed, but some don't.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, but they don't need a deed if it's worded properly in the divorce decree, is that correct?
Exactly,
Okay,
yes.
great.
divested of all rights, title, and claims.
Wow.
Yes. So,
Sometimes we're asked to pay credit cards or other bills that the divorce decree requires for us to do, and in that case, it's just like paying off a mortgage. We have to get a payoff statement from whomever we're paying off, or we go by the amount that's allocated in the divorce decree. Also, the proceeds can there be split 60-40, 70-30, however the divorce decree may read.
So that divorce decree is what tells us what we have to do. And it's one of the exceptions to the rule of not giving the proceeds directly just to the seller. So it would be whatever that divorce decree says. Sometimes we have to do crazy math that makes my head hurt, because they say, you know, so-and-so was responsible for the mortgage payments and, any repairs and maintenance on the property up till the date of sale. And so you figure the proceeds, take all that part out, then figure the 50-50 It's crazy.
Yes.
And then send it to everybody and make sure they agree that your math is right, because it has to be them.
It's one of those scary word math problems.
Yes,
That's right.
exactly. So it's, you redo it 15 times. So, sometimes, Ovaltine. Yeah. I've done that maybe twice in 15 years, where there was an Ovaltine and it's part of a divorce. Like one spouse kept the property and bought out the equity of the other, and they do a refinance, and that, it's just a different word for the deed.
Okay.
But that word actually makes sense. They owe money, it's an Ovaltine, as
Right.
opposed to the inchoate that we came across
Yeah.
earlier.
Yes,
I Googled that, by the way.
Yes.
Just began and not so fully formed or developed. Rudimentary.
Oh,
Oh,
I thought it was a real word, because I thought it was a typo.
No, it's a real word. I love Google, so I sat there and it's
so it's not fully formed.
inco.
So a teenager is inchoate.
It's inco, it's not cho, inchoate. I don't really know how to pronounce it basically, but it's not cho, it's co.
Okay,
So-
inco.
And I wish it said it's, where it was derived, I don't know, I love words, so I'm sitting there going, I don't love Google. So anyway, it is a real word, it's not a typo.
Helpful hints on your next crossroad.
That's right, it's a real word.
So you don't have to have a brain if you've got Google.
Let's see. Oh, I guess we touched on when there's a buyer who's getting a divorce. That can be tricky as well, because, and it's really involves more the lender than us, because it's gonna be the lender's requirement. But if that divorce is not final before the closing, most lenders will require the soon-to-be ex-spouse to sign the deed of trust. And the reason is, it's still community property until the divorce is final.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, so when they ask us about it, it's really funny how many times we're the ones that get to tell people these things instead of their attorneys telling them.
Yeah.
But, it's just generally to say that's the rule, because you never know. They could be in the middle of this divorce that looks like it's gonna be final tomorrow, and then they reconcile. And if one spouse is not on that deed of trust, the mortgage is not perfected. So, because someone who owns half of the property didn't sign the mortgage.
Mhm.
So,
Is that because of Texas law as a community property?
yes.
Okay, so if one spouse buys property, both of them own it.
Yes.
Okay, interesting.
And attorneys probably know some ways around some of that, but generally that's what we're working with. So, if a buyer is about to be divorced and they're buying a property and getting a mortgage, most of the time, the soon-to-be ex will have to sign the deed of trust. What we usually say to that person is, just here, take a copy of it, make sure your attorney has it, and y'all deal with this in your divorce decree,
Mhm.
so that they get it straight there.
And then also, I've noticed here lately on some of my files that Debbie pointed, sometimes she thinks someone's divorce is gonna be final tomorrow, and then they make up. Well, whenever there's a divorce filed, we know about it. So whenever a divorce is filed, it's also gotta be dismissed as well. So sometimes I've had holdups on where, yes, they were going to get divorced, but I've gotta get a dismissal proof that they're no longer. So,
In the middle of that.
yeah.
So that is, we kind of talk about things that we have to clear up before we can go to closing, and a divorce situation is one of those that if you want to open title on something and we think it might close in a week, if it's in the middle of a divorce, it may not. So it just depends on where they are in that process and how willing they are to cooperate. Next one we have is when we get the title work back and there's someone still in the title who's deceased. That also is probably not gonna close in a week. So, because we have to figure out what happened to that person's interest in the property. So if there was a will probated, then our plant can order the probate documents from the county clerk's office to see how the property was handled. If there was,
If the will isn't probated.
Right.
Is there another?
Ownership affidavit.
yes.
Yes.
If you wanna
The airship affidavit, there's a questionnaire that we'll send out, and they need to put their names, when they were married, if they have any children together, if the deceased has any other children besides their children. Also, we require 2 disinterested parties to, their information as well, that have known the
At least 10
deceased
years.
at least 10 years.
Right.
And a lot of people, when they hear the 10 years, they're like, well, we just moved here 5 years ago. They could be anywhere. They don't have to be your next door neighbor or right down the road. They could be anywhere. After the little questionnaire is completed, we send it to an attorney who prepares the affidavit. And what the affidavit is the decedent's spouse or whoever is.
Usually it's a spouse.
Yeah, usually it's the spouse. Will sign an affidavit to just state that all the facts that they provided were correct. And then we send the affidavit to the 2 disinterested parties, who basically sign stating that, yes, they knew the descendant for at least 10 years, and to the best of their knowledge, all the facts that on the original affidavit are a true fact, so.
Right, so what it does is it establishes who has to sign to sell the property. So whether it be just that spouse, they were married for 50 years and they only had their children together, then, in that case, it's simple. Or do the children have to join in? So I had one just last week where it was 4 siblings, 3 brothers and a sister, and I'm trying to think how that happened. It was, they had a will that was probated for their mom, but the dad had passed away prior to the mom, and he did not have a will that was probated. So they had to do an heirship affidavit for his interest. So all of that was handled. It just took longer than just a couple of days to do that. We had, one sibling who's on a boat somewhere. And she had to get into port and sign the affidavit and overnight it back to us. And it has to be notarized. So
I think I've had as many as 12 on a file, 12 heirs that had to sign
Oh my
on.
goodness.
And because Texas is a community property, not only did they have to sign, but we had to get their spouse to sign
Yes.
a document as well stating that they have no interest in.
Wow.
Yeah, so it can get fun.
So again, if you have a property that someone's passed away who's been in the chain of title, that's another reason that you would want to open title ahead of time before you have a
That's what I'm gonna
contract.
have.
Yeah.
But we've already done it on one property. Do we go ahead and open title again?
It would be a good idea to just make sure that everything's clear, so if you get a cash buyer that wants to close next week,
Yeah.
you're prepared for that.
So we have to send another copy, or would they already have one on file of the trust or the will?
The will.
Yeah.
If it's been probated, then it'll be there, but it's a good idea to give as much information as you can.
Oh.
Sometimes it saves your client money.
Oh.
Because if we don't have to order it from the county, if we've got a full copy, then that saves money
Oh, okay.
and time.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, and then sometimes we get into a situation where someone who's passed away didn't have such a clear history as being married to one person for 50 years. Maybe they had, 3 spouses with children from all of them. That's where you get into 12 heirs and their wives. So all of those people who might have an interest.
And then, as our favorite topic is FIRPTA. It's the Foreign Investment Realty Property Real Property Tax Act. In our processing questions and on the open order checklist, we ask if your client, the seller, is a U.S. citizen or resident alien, and this is why. Basically, FIRPTA can apply to real estate transactions when the sales price is over $300,000, or the buyer does not intend to use the property as his primary residence. So if he's buying investment property. If the seller of the property is not a U.S. citizen or a resident alien, we are required to withhold
10% of the sales price.
and file the paperwork with the IRS. So it's 10% of the sales price will automatically be taken off and paid to the IRS.
So this is something that we ask this upfront on every transaction. Is the seller a U.S. citizen or resident alien for tax purposes? That way, if it looks like this, and this is all IRS law, if this is going to apply to our transaction, we know about it as soon as possible. Because there are some steps that a seller can take so that we wouldn't have to withhold that, but it takes time because you're dealing with the IRS and they don't do anything quick.
Okay, so this law is an attempt to collect taxes from the seller?
Yes.
Okay, so why does it say it applies if the buyer does not intend to use the property?
It's a couple of different, there's actually a whole list of rules, but generally speaking, what we see is that when it applies, it would be a seller is not a U.S. citizen, they're not a resident alien,
Right.
and the sales price is over $300,000.
Right.
Okay, that's one situation. Another situation would be the seller is not a U.S. citizen, they're not a resident alien, the sales price is under $300,000, and the buyer is not going to use the property as a principal residence, it's going to be an investment property.
Okay.
So that would be another situation where the withholding law would apply.
Okay.
Also, what buyers are really shocked to find out is that the IRS law names the buyer as the withholding agent. So, yes, so when this happens and this has to be withheld, there's paperwork that has to be sent to IRS that's filled out by both the seller and the buyer.
Does it create tax implications for the buyer?
It could, if it's not dealt with at closing. So if,
Okay.
you know, a year and a half after closing, this buyer finds out that their seller really should have paid taxes and didn't, then there can be a lien by the IRS put on the property.
Oh, my goodness.
And that's why we deal with this, to try to help facilitate it. Even though it's not technically the title company's job to do this, we feel like it is our job to educate and to help facilitate.
So if a seller is not a